Story begins. The town of Harwick, West Virginia, had exactly three things it was proud of: its coal heritage, its covered bridge built in 1887, and Aldrich Venn. Nobody remembered exactly when Aldrich had arrived. He was simply there, the way a mountain is simply there. Permanent, unquestioned, built into the landscape before anyone thought to ask how it got there. His shop occupied the corner of Milburn Street and Route 9, a narrow building with dark wood paneling and a hand-painted sign above the door that read, Venn & Son Horological Services. The & Son part had always puzzled people. Aldrich had no son that anyone knew of, but no one asked. You didn't ask Aldrich things he hadn't offered. That was just the unspoken law of Harwick. He was 73 years old or thereabouts. His face had the quality of old leather, not worn out, but broken in. Useful. The lines around his eyes deepened when he concentrated, which was almost always. His hands were the most remarkable thing about him. Large, deliberate hands with fingers that moved over the interior of a watch movement the way a pianist moves over keys, without hesitation, without doubt, with the particular grace of someone who has done something 10,000 times and still finds it interesting. Every morning at 7:45, he unlocked the front door of the shop. Every evening at 6:15, he locked it. In between, he sat at his workbench beneath a banker's lamp, its green glass shade casting a circle of light onto the tools arranged with military precision around him. Watchmaker's loop mounted in his eye, tweezers moving with the patience of a surgeon. The tiny gears and springs and escapement wheels of other people's time laid out before him like secrets waiting to be understood. People brought him watches the way they brought priests their confessions. A grandmother's pocket watch that stopped the day she died and hadn't run since. A soldier's field watch returned from overseas with shrapnel damage to the case. Anniversary gifts with inscriptions worn smooth. Timepieces that carried weight beyond their mechanics. Objects that had become sacred by proximity to important moments, and which needed to be made whole again for reasons that had nothing to do with telling time. Aldrich fixed them all. He never rushed. He never made promises about when something would be ready. He simply said, "I'll have it for you when it's right." And it always was. But that wasn't the full story. Cale Morrow had been working in the shop for 11 weeks when he found the door. He was 24. Recently graduated from a vocational program in Morgantown, specializing in mechanical horology. His instructor, Professor Denkman, had told him there was one watchmaker left in 3 counties worth learning from. "His name is Venn," Denkman had said. "He'll either teach you more than I ever did, or he won't teach you anything at all. Either way, you'll learn something." Cale had arrived on a Tuesday in October with a portfolio of repair certificates and a nervous energy he tried to hide by talking too much. Aldrich had looked at the portfolio without opening it, asked Cale one question. "What's the function of a lever escapement?" Listened to the answer without expression, and then said, 6:15 to close. Don't be late twice." That was it. No contract, no formal arrangement. Just 2 men in a shop with a lot of broken timepieces and the quiet understanding that something was being passed from one generation to the next. The work suited Cale. He was methodical by nature, prone to getting lost in detail, comfortable with silence in a way that most people his age weren't. He liked the smell of the shop, watchmaker's oil and old wood, and the faint metallic tang of brass. He liked the ticking, the layered overlapping rhythms of dozens of clocks on the walls, marking time in slightly different ways. He liked the way Aldrich moved, unhurried and precise, like a man who had made a private agreement with time and was honoring it. What he did not like was the back room. Not that there was anything obviously wrong with it. It was a storage space, mostly, accessible through a door behind the workbench that Aldrich kept closed, but not locked. Cale had been back there twice in 11 weeks, once to retrieve a box of mainsprings, once to find a specific caliber gauge. Both times he'd felt an inexplicable discomfort. Not fear. Something quieter than fear. The sense that he was standing somewhere he wasn't supposed to fully understand. The room held shelving units loaded with supply boxes, spare parts organized in small glass jars, 3 antique bracket clocks awaiting restoration, and in the far corner, a work table buried under a canvas tarpaulin. The tarp was dusty. It clearly hadn't been moved in a long time. Cale had never asked what was under it. Aldrich had never mentioned it. And then came the day everything changed. It was a Thursday, late November, the kind of afternoon when the light died early and the temperature dropped fast. Aldrich had left at 4:30 to see his physician, something Cale had never known him to do before, and had told Cale to close up at 6:15. "Touch nothing in the back," he'd said, which was not something he had said before either. Cale spent the next hour and a half doing exactly what he was told. He finished a complete service on a Hamilton 992B railroad watch, cleaned the movement, oiled the jewels, regulated the escapement, closed the case. He swept the front floor. He wiped down the display cases. At 6:02, a water pipe in the back room began to knock. It was a sound Cale had never heard before in the shop, a rhythmic hammering from behind the wall, the kind of noise that demands investigation. He went to the back room, turned on the overhead bulb, listened. The sound was coming from the far wall, behind the work table in the corner, behind the tarpaulin. He pulled the tarp aside. Beneath it was not what he expected. The work table held tools, yes, but not watchmaking tools. A shortwave radio transceiver, old military issue, its casing scratched and repainted at least twice. A logbook, leather-bound, filled with handwriting in two different hands. A portable signal analyzer mounted on a bracket, connected to nothing now, its screen dark. And built into the wall itself, where the paneling met the baseboard, a recessed door, flush with the surface, invisible unless you were standing at exactly the right angle. The door was approximately 18 inches wide and 2 feet tall. A maintenance access panel, maybe. Except it had a combination lock mounted at its center, not a padlock. A 5-digit rotary combination, the kind found on high-security safes, mounted on what appeared to be a standard wooden access panel. Cale stared at it. The pipe had stopped knocking. He replaced the tarpaulin exactly as he'd found it, turned off the back room light, locked the front door at precisely 6:15, and went home. He did not sleep well that night. What he had seen didn't make sense in any framework he had for Aldrich Venn. It didn't make sense in any framework he had for Harwick, West Virginia, or small-town watchmaking, or the quiet life of a 73-year-old man who fixed other people's time. But that was only the beginning. 3 days passed. Cale did not go near the back room. He worked the counter, handled 3 routine appraisals, serviced a Westminster chime mantel clock, and said nothing. The routine of the shop was its own instruction. There was a correct way to do everything, and following it was a form of respect for the man who had built it. That discipline cost Cale something, but he paid it willingly. He was good at patience. He'd had to be. Growing up in a house where his father's disapproval was unpredictable and his mother's silence was absolute, patience had been the only reliable currency. But patience and stillness are different things. He was patient. He was not still inside. He thought about the transceiver constantly. The Collins KWM-2A, which he'd identified after a careful search of vintage military communications equipment, was not a piece you stumbled upon at a garage sale. It was specialized, valued, and, in its modified form, the kind of hardware that appeared in exactly one category of situation. He thought about the logbook with its dual handwriting and its notation system that wasn't any standard cipher, but which had the structural regularity of one. He thought about the combination lock on the recessed door. 5 digits, built into the wall, not attached to it, which meant it had been there when the wall was finished or close to it. Pre-planned, deliberate, part of the original construction. You don't build a combination lock into a wall in a small-town watch repair shop by accident. Aldrich returned from his medical appointment with no explanation and no change in behavior. He sat at his bench, picked up his loop, and resumed work as if he had never left. Cale watched him. Really watched him. The way you watch something after you've learned you've been looking at it wrong. The first thing he noticed was the telephone. The shop had one landline, an old rotary phone mounted on the wall beside the door to the back room. Aldrich almost never used it. Customers rarely called. But twice in the week following the discovery, Cale arrived in the morning to find Aldrich already at the bench. Unusual, since Aldrich was never at the shop before Cale. And both times, the notepad beside the phone had fresh writing on it. Not words, numbers. Arranged in groups that didn't correspond to any phone number format Cale recognized. He photographed them with his phone before Aldrich could notice. The second thing was the watches. Cale had been repairing watches long enough to know that every movement had a character. The wear patterns on gears, the condition of jewels, the particular way a balance wheel had been regulated, all of it told a story about the watch's history. He started paying closer attention to the pieces Aldrich handled personally, the ones that came in without customers attached, delivered by mail or left in the shop's drop box overnight. One came in a plain cardboard box with a Swiss postmark, no return address. Aldrich opened it at the bench when he thought Cale was in the back, but Cale watched through the gap in the doorframe. Inside the box was a single watch, a Hamilton 910, railroad grade, already cased. Aldrich didn't open the case to examine the movement. He turned the watch over, looked at the case back for exactly 30 seconds, wrote something in his notebook, and placed the watch in the locked drawer beneath his bench. That drawer had always been locked. Cale had assumed it held customer records or financial documents. Now he wasn't sure. The third thing was the scar, Aldrich's left forearm. It appeared when he rolled up his sleeves in the afternoon heat of the shop, visible for moments at a time. An old scar, surgical, running from the inside of his wrist toward his elbow. Not fresh, decades old, judging by the way the skin had settled around it. The kind of scar that came from something being removed or something being repaired. Cale had noticed it before but not thought about it. Now it occupied his thoughts in ways he couldn't fully explain. He started researching. He did it methodically, the way Aldrich had taught him to approach a complicated repair. Begin at the surface. Go deeper only when the surface doesn't explain what you're seeing. He started with what he could see directly. The notation on the notepad. He'd photographed 2 examples. The format was consistent. A group of 3 letters, then a dash, then a 4-digit number, then a space, then a single letter. Like call signs married to frequencies, like schedules, like messages being acknowledged and filed. He took the photographs to the college library in the next town on a Saturday, sat with a graduate student who studied cryptographic history, and explained he'd found the notations in a box of his grandfather's papers and wanted to know if they meant anything. The student looked at them for a long time. "It's not encrypted," she said finally. "It's a logging format, military-style message acknowledgement. The letters at the front are originating codes, like call signs. The 4-digit number is a timestamp in 24-hour format without the colon. The single letter at the end is a status code." She pointed. "A means acknowledged, T means transmitted, R means repeated." She paused. "Where did your grandfather serve?" Cale told her he didn't know much about his grandfather's military service. She looked at him like she wasn't entirely sure she believed him. He drove back to Harwick with the confirmation settled in his chest like a stone in water, not floating, sinking, finding its resting place. He told himself he was being paranoid. He told himself there were perfectly rational explanations for a radio transceiver in a watchmaker's back room and unmarked packages from Switzerland and number sequences on notepads. He told himself Aldrich was simply an eccentric old man with a complicated history, the way many old men had complicated histories, and that none of it was his business. He didn't believe himself. The answer came from an unlikely direction. Cale's grandmother, Vera, was 81 and lived in a retirement community outside Clarksburg. He visited her on Sundays. 3 weeks after finding the hidden door, he sat with her over coffee and mentioned, carefully, that he was working for a watchmaker named Aldrich Venn in Harwick. Vera's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down, looked at Cale with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not alarm, not recognition. Something more complicated, something that contained layers of time. "That name," she said. "You know him?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I knew of him, a long time ago." "How?" Your grandfather knew people, she said carefully. He worked in certain circles, government adjacent. The kind of work where you knew names but never faces, and some names you were told to forget. Cale's grandfather had died when Cale was 4. He'd worked for the Department of Defense, in some capacity that had never been made entirely clear. After his death, Vera had put away everything related to his professional life in a box she kept in the back of her closet and had never discussed. Ven was a name, she said. I heard it maybe twice. Your grandfather came home one night. This would have been 1979, maybe 1980, and he was white as a sheet. He wouldn't say why. That night he said, if you ever hear the name Aldrich Ven, you walk the other direction. Why? He didn't say. Did he say what Ven did? Vera wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. He said Ven didn't do anything. He said Ven was the one who made sure other people's work disappeared without a trace. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the garden. Your grandfather told me once that the most dangerous kind of invisible person isn't the one nobody knows about. It's the one everybody sees every day and never thinks twice about. A man who has a shop on a corner, who fixes things, who is useful and reliable and precisely what he appears to be, so that the question of what else he might be never occurs to anyone. Cale felt those words settle into him with specific weight. He was afraid of him? Cale asked. Not exactly. He respected him. There's a difference. Vera set down her cup. He said the people in those programs, the deep ones, the ones that didn't officially exist, they weren't afraid of the obvious threats. They were afraid of the quiet ones, the ones who had learned to make their presence feel like absence. She looked at Cale with eyes that held the particular sadness of someone who had spent decades not thinking about something and had just been made to think about it again. Be careful, she said. What happened next changed everything. Cale drove back to Harwick that Sunday night with his grandmother's words sitting in his chest like a stone. He had not planned what he did next. He would tell himself later that he hadn't planned it, that it was impulse or necessity or the particular momentum of a truth that had already started moving and couldn't be stopped. But the reality was simpler than that. He drove past his apartment and kept going, all the way to Milburn Street, parked half a block from the shop, and sat in his car staring at the dark windows of Ven Horological. The shop was closed, locked, empty. But there was a light on in the back room, a faint light, visible only through the narrow gap at the base of the back room's single ground-level window, the kind of gap that let out just enough glow to confirm presence. Someone was in there, or something was running in there. Cale sat for 40 minutes. The light didn't change. He drove home. He spent the next week doing something he was not proud of, but which he could not stop. He researched Aldrich Ven, not casually, systematically. He searched newspaper archives, property records, business registration databases, anything publicly accessible. The results were both illuminating and deeply strange. Aldrich Ven had purchased the Harwick property in 1981. Before that, there was nothing. No prior address, no educational records, no military service record, no birth certificate in any West Virginia database. It was as if he had appeared, fully formed in 1981, and simply begun operating a watch repair shop. The business license listed his date of birth as March 4th, 1952. That would make him 73, but Cale ran that date through every database he could access and found nothing that connected it to a real person prior to the Harwick business registration. He ran the name through Google in every combination he could think of. Aldrich Ven, A. Ven Watchmaker, Ven Horological, nothing. Not a single digital footprint beyond the bare-bones business listing on a local directory and a one-sentence mention in a 2009 Harwick Gazette article about Milburn Street businesses. A man who had operated a business for more than 40 years and had almost no presence in any record system. That wasn't an accident. That was deliberate. And that's when things took a darker turn. Cale made a decision. He was going to ask, not accuse, not confront, just ask. He was young and probably wrong about all of it, and Aldrich was an old man who deserved better than suspicion. But the alternative, continuing to work in a shop full of unanswered questions, continuing to watch a man he'd come to respect with eyes that had stopped trusting what they saw, that felt wrong in a different way. He came in on a Monday morning, made coffee, let the shop settle into its rhythm, waited until Aldrich was at the bench and the work had its usual texture. Then he said quietly, "I moved the tarp in the back room 3 weeks ago when the pipe was knocking." Aldrich's tweezers did not stop moving. He said nothing for a full 30 seconds. Then he set the tweezers down, removed the loop from his eye, turned on his stool to face Cale. His expression was not angry, not alarmed. It carried something Cale had no word for, a kind of careful recalibration, the look of a man adjusting to new information and deciding what to do with it. "What did you see?" Aldrich asked. "A transceiver, a logbook, a signal analyzer, a combination lock built into the wall." Silence. "What else?" "Numbers on the notepad by the phone. A watch that came from Switzerland that you didn't open." Another silence. Longer this time. Aldrich's hands rested flat on his thighs, motionless in a way that Cale had never seen before. The shop ticked around them. "How much do you want to know?" Aldrich said finally. "Everything." Aldrich looked at him for a long time. The banker's lamp cast its green-tinted light across the tools between them. The clocks on the wall measured out the silence in overlapping rhythms. Outside, a truck passed on Route 9, rattling the front window. "Some knowledge," Aldrich said, "is not a gift, it's a weight. Once you carry it, you can't put it down." "I understand." "You don't," Aldrich said, not unkindly, "but you will." He stood, moved to the back room door and opened it. The tarpaulin came off in one practiced motion. Aldrich stood beside the work table and looked at the equipment the way an old soldier might look at a photograph from a war, with recognition and distance simultaneously. He was quiet while Cale took in the details again, this time with better light and the permission to look. The transceiver was a Collins KWM-2A, Cale now recognized. A high-frequency transceiver used extensively by intelligence agencies through the 1970s and 80s. Modified. Someone had replaced the stock frequency modulator with a custom unit. The handwriting in the logbook was small and neat, and used a notation system that wasn't any cipher Cale recognized. Numbers paired with letters paired with time notations. Aldrich pulled a chair from the corner, sat in it, folded his hands. "My name," he said, "is not Aldrich Venn. Or rather, it is now, because it has been for 43 years. But before 1981, I had a different name, a different life, a different country." Cale sat on a supply crate. "What country?" "That's complicated. I was born in Hungary, moved to West Germany as a teenager, recruited by the BND, the German intelligence service, in 1969, when I was 19 years old. By 1973, I had been seconded to a joint NATO signals intelligence program called Meridian." He said the name the way you'd say a word in a language you hadn't spoken in years, carefully, feeling the shape of it. Meridian was a passive intelligence network, not field operations, not espionage in the way most people imagine it. We monitored communications, we intercepted signals, we read the electromagnetic landscape of Eastern Europe and translated it into intelligence that allowed NATO to understand Soviet movements without direct contact. It was quiet work, invisible work. Nobody knew it existed. He stopped, looked at Cale. "You know what makes a watch useful?" he asked. Cale blinked at the pivot. "The precision, the consistency." "Exactly. A watch is useful because it is reliable in a way that human beings rarely are. Meridian operated on that principle. Not humans in the field making judgment calls under pressure. Machinery, automated intercept stations disguised as ordinary commercial operations. Jewelers' shops, clockmakers, small repair businesses in ordinary towns near communications infrastructure." He looked at the transceiver. "This town sits 40 miles from a Cold War-era relay installation that, officially, was decommissioned in 1988. Unofficially, it continued to carry low-frequency signals until 1997 as part of a legacy monitoring protocol that was never properly shut down. My job, for 23 years, was to listen to those signals and report what I heard. To who? Originally to BND liaisons. After 1985, when the program was reorganized, to a NATO coordination office in Brussels. After 1991, when most of Meridian was mothballed, to no one. To a dead channel, out of habit. He was quiet again. Then, I never stopped listening. Some habits outlive their purpose. No one expected what came next. "Why watches?" Cale asked. Aldrich almost smiled. It was the first time Cale had seen anything approaching levity in his expression, and it transformed his face briefly into something younger and stranger. Watches were my training, my actual training. The BND chose recruits with technical backgrounds, engineering, science, mechanics. It was easier to teach a watchmaker signals intelligence than to teach a signals analyst to build a convincing cover identity. So I became genuinely what I appeared to be. The cover and the reality merged. He picked up a mainspring from the work table, turned it between his fingers. I am a real watchmaker. Everything I've told people about my craft is true. The repairs are real. The skills are real. The love of the work is real. He paused. Some deceptions work because they're entirely false. This one worked because most of it was entirely true. Cale thought about all the watches he'd seen Aldrich handle, the grandmother's pocket watch, the shrapnel-damaged field piece, the anniversaries and inheritances and sacred objects, all of it real, all of it genuine. "The watches that come in the mail," Cale said, "the one from Switzerland." Aldrich's expression shifted. The brief lightness was gone. "That's more complicated. Tell me." When Meridian was officially disbanded, the parts of it that were officially acknowledged, the people who'd operated within it were given two options: formal discharge and repatriation, which meant giving up your cover identity and returning to your country of origin, or continuation under a legacy protocol, which meant staying in place, maintaining your cover, and remaining available as a passive resource if needed. You chose to stay. I had been Aldrich Venn for 8 years by then. I had this shop, I had this town. He looked around the back room. I had nothing to go back to. Hungary was still not the Hungary I'd been born into. Germany was not my home. This was. But someone's still contacting you. Aldrich set the mainspring down. "The watches," he said, "are a dead drop system. When a particular caliber of watch arrives from a particular postmark, it means a contact wants acknowledgement. The caseback carries a microdot, a photographic image reduced to the size of a period. I read it, encode a response in the logbook using the Meridian cipher, transmit on the scheduled frequency at the scheduled time, and wait. What do they want? Different things at different times. Usually verification that certain legacy monitoring equipment in this region is still silent. Confirmation that no new signals have appeared on frequencies Meridian once owned. Occasionally historical context. Someone is writing a report or conducting an internal review and needs a ground-level confirmation of something that happened decades ago. He paused. It's clerical work, mostly. Keeping the files in order for a program that has been effectively dead for 30 years. Then why keep it secret? Aldrich looked at him steadily. Because the people I still report to, the ones on the other end of that dead drop, are not officially acknowledged to exist. And if it were known that a passive Meridian network node had been operating in American territory for 43 years, without disclosure to American intelligence services, the diplomatic implications would be significant. Cale sat with that for a moment. "You're an unregistered foreign intelligence asset," he said, "operating on American soil." "I am a watchmaker," Aldrich said, "who happens to have a complicated past." The distinction felt very thin. The days that followed had a different texture. Cale went home each evening and sat with what he knew. Aldrich had told him in installments, the way you feed someone medicine too strong to take all at once. Each morning brought new details, new context, new layers of a life that had been constructed with the care and precision Aldrich brought to everything he did. He told it chronologically, the way a watchmaker disassembles a movement, from the outside inward, from the visible to the hidden, working carefully so nothing is lost. 1969. A 19-year-old from Budapest, transplanted to Munich with his family after 1956, recruited by the BND at a technical college where he'd been studying mechanical engineering with a focus on precision instruments. His recruiter had been a man named Fischer, who told him, accurately it turned out, that his work would never be visible, would never be recognized, might never matter in any way he could verify, but that it would matter. Fischer was a compact man who drank tea rather than coffee, and wore the same grey suit every time Cale later imagined him, which was not something Fischer had specified, but which felt right somehow. He had found the 19-year-old in a workshop, repairing a pocket watch belonging to a professor, and had watched him work for 15 minutes before introducing himself. The recruiting pitch had taken 12 minutes. "You have the right hands and the wrong ambitions," Fischer had said. "Let me give you better ones." 1971. First posting to a monitoring station disguised as a jeweler's shop in Bonn. 2 years learning the craft of signals interception alongside the craft of watch repair, both disciplines demanding the same qualities: patience, precision, attention to detail invisible to ordinary eyes. The station operator there was a former Estonian radio technician named Luda, who smelled of pipe tobacco and spoke in English because, he said, it was the only language in which he had no emotional attachments. He had taught Aldrich, then operating under a different name, his first cover, how to read a signal the way you read a face. "Every transmission has a personality," Luder had said. "Learn the personality, and you know more than the words." 1975. Transfer to Meridian's Western Cell, operating out of a series of small commercial businesses, a camera repair shop in Belgium, a music instrument restorer in the Netherlands, a clockmaker in Austria, all of them genuine businesses, all of them nodes in a passive monitoring network stretched across NATO's eastern edge. 6 years of this work. 6 years of being useful in a way that produced no records, no citations, no evidence of existence. The years had a quality Aldrich described as, like working in a room with no windows. You know the world is outside, you've chosen not to look at it directly. 1981. Transfer to the United States under a program that no one, including Aldrich, had been fully briefed on. A new identity, a new name, a new country. A shop on Milburn Street in Harwick, West Virginia, 40 miles from a relay station that nobody in Harwick had ever noticed. The identity package had arrived in a manila envelope. Inside, a birth certificate issued in Ohio, a social security number, a driver's license, a business registration, and a single handwritten note that said only, "Everything you need to become him. The rest is your work." He had studied the documents for 3 days before he understood that Aldrich Venn was not a name chosen at random. The initials, AV, were his own real initials, reversed. Someone with a sense of continuity, or perhaps a sense of humor, had given him that much of himself to carry forward. "Why America?" Cale asked, one morning over coffee. Meridian's planners believed the eastern seaboard had monitoring gaps. The relay station here was part of a system designed to fill those gaps. But you needed human oversight. Automated systems malfunction. They need someone to notice when something changes. And you were that someone. I was efficient. I was already established in cover work. I spoke English without an accent. My mother had insisted. She thought it would be useful. She had no idea how right she was. He smiled faintly. And I had no one to leave behind. That detail landed differently than the others. Cale had heard in it the specific weight of a man describing not just a practical consideration, but a defining fact of his life. "Did you ever want to leave?" Cale asked. "Any of it?" Aldrich was quiet for long enough that Cale thought he wasn't going to answer. "There was a woman," he said finally. "In Brussels, 1978. Her name was Elise. She worked for the European Commission, genuine civil servant, no intelligence connection. We were together for 2 years. She wanted to marry. I couldn't tell her who I was. I couldn't become who I'd need to be to stay with her honestly. He picked up his tweezers, turned them over in his hands without using them. I left. I was told Meridian required my relocation. That was true. It was also convenient. He set the tweezers down. I have not allowed myself to be inconvenient since. The sentence sat between them in the green-lit silence of the shop. And that's when Cale understood what he was really looking at. Not a spy. Not a foreign asset. Not a security risk or a diplomatic incident waiting to happen. An old man who had spent 50 years being useful and reliable and precise, and had paid for it in every coin that mattered. The watches on the walls of Aldrich's shop kept their overlapping time. Cale counted them once, 47, each one running, each one accurate. Each one the result of someone's care, someone's technical devotion, someone's refusal to let a mechanism fail. He thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. Two events occurred in December that forced the question Cale had been circling without landing on. The first was a visit from a man named Conrad Hess. He appeared on a Wednesday mid-morning, shortly after Cale had arrived. 60s, trim, wearing a coat that was too expensive for Harwick and too understated for someone who wanted to look expensive. He spoke to Aldrich in German, low, fast, clearly not intended for Cale's ears, though Cale understood enough German from 2 years of study to catch fragments. He caught relay station. He caught verification required. He caught unmistakably Washington is asking questions. Hess left after 20 minutes without acknowledging Cale's existence. Aldrich sat at his bench for a full hour after Hess's departure without doing any work, just sitting, his hands folded, his eyes on the middle distance. "Was that your handler?" Cale asked. "Liaison," Aldrich said. "The current one, the fourth I've had since 1981. "What did he want?" Aldrich was quiet for a moment. Then, "To tell me I should prepare for a possibility I've been aware of for a long time." "What possibility?" "That this arrangement may not remain quiet. That certain documents from Meridian's organizational files may be approaching declassification in Germany and the Netherlands. That if they are released in their current form, my identity and location may become discernible to people who know how to read intelligence archives." Cale felt cold. American intelligence? Potentially, or investigative journalists, or both. What happens then? Aldrich looked at the tools on his workbench. The loop, the tweezers, the mainspring winder, 40 years of precision laid out in a row. "I don't know," he said. "I've spent 43 years being very good at one thing, remaining invisible while being present. If that's no longer possible, I'm not certain what I am." He paused. The clocks on the wall continued without him. They always did. They were designed to. "There was a point," Aldrich said slowly, "perhaps 15 years ago, when I understood that the monitoring role had effectively ended. The relay station had gone silent. The frequencies I'd been assigned to watch had been repurposed. There was nothing left to listen to." He picked up a small gear from the bench, turned it between his fingers. "I could have surfaced then, applied for legal status. There were channels even then for people in arrangements like mine, diplomatic protocols, quiet resolutions. But you didn't. No." He set the gear down. "Because by then, this was just my life. Not a cover, not an assignment, just the life I had assembled, piece by piece, from what I'd been given." He gestured at the shop around them, the cases, the clocks, the tools, the worn leather of the stool beneath him. "You can't walk away from your own life simply because it began as something else." Cale thought about that for a long time after. The second event happened 10 days later. Cale's phone rang at 11:30 at night, unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Morrow." A woman's voice, precise, clipped, American. "This is not a conversation I'll repeat. You work for Aldrich Venn, is that correct?" "Yes." "I'm going to give you one piece of information and one instruction. The information: we've been aware of Mr. Venn's presence and activities for significantly longer than he knows. The instruction: say nothing to him about this call. Sit with what I'm about to tell you and make your own determination. About what? Whether the man deserves what's coming, or whether someone should warn him first. She paused. In 6 weeks, a joint American-German intelligence review is going to formally identify the Harwick relay station as an unreported legacy node. At that point, everything connected to it becomes a federal matter. Mr. Venn will have 36 hours at most before people with authority and bad intentions arrive at his door. Who are you? Someone who thinks old men who did quiet work in service of a larger good deserve better than a perp walk into a federal building at age 73. Another pause. What you do with that is your choice. The line went dead. Cale sat in the dark of his apartment for 2 hours. He thought about all of it. The transceiver, the combination lock, his grandmother's face when he'd said the name, the Swiss watch and its microdot, the numbers on the notepad and what the library student had told him about logging formats, Hess in his expensive coat, the 4 liaison officers across 43 years, the dead channel, the frequencies gone silent. He thought about the 47 clocks on the walls of a shop in a small West Virginia town, all of them running, all of them accurate, because an old man took the time every week to wind them and regulate them and care for them the way he cared for everything in his domain, completely, without acknowledgement, without anyone knowing why or whether it mattered. He thought about what it meant to spend half a century being reliable in a way that required you to be invisible, to be trusted with other people's most precious things, their grandmother's stopped watch, their father's anniversary gift, their soldier's field piece, while carrying something that could never be shared, never be acknowledged, never be laid down on the workbench beside the tweezers and examined in the light. The woman on the phone had said, whether the man deserves what's coming, or whether someone should warn him first. There was really only one answer to that. No one expected what came next. He made coffee at 6 in the morning and drove to the shop. He was there when Aldrich arrived at 7:40. He was sitting on the front step, which had never happened before. Aldrich stopped on the sidewalk and looked at him with the particular alertness of a man trained to read irregularity. "Tell me something," Cale said. "If you had to leave, if everything here had to end, what would you take with you?" Aldrich looked at him for a long moment. "Sit down," Cale said. "We need to talk." He told Aldrich everything, the phone call, the timeline, the 6 weeks. Aldrich listened without interrupting. He sat in the chair he always sat in, beneath the banker's lamp with its green shade, and he listened the way he worked, completely, with full attention, missing nothing. When Cale finished, the shop was very quiet. "You believe her?" Aldrich said. "I don't know, but I think you should." Aldrich looked at the clocks on the walls, all 47 of them, measuring the silence. "I've thought about this," he said. "The possibility. I've had contingency plans for most of my adult life. That's the nature of the work. You always know which door is the exit." "Do you have one?" "Yes." "Will you use it?" Another long quiet. The clocks ticked on. Somewhere outside, a car passed on Route 9. "There are things here," Aldrich said slowly, "that can't be packed. This shop, these customers, the watches people have trusted me with." He looked at the display cases, the clocks, the tools. "You cannot put 43 years in a bag. You can put yourself in a bag." Aldrich almost laughed. The sound was unfamiliar in the shop. Not unkind, not unhappy, just rare. "Perhaps." "There's something else," Cale said. Aldrich waited. "If you go, if all of this ends without anyone knowing what it was, then the work is just gone. You're just gone. Same as a watch nobody thought to repair." He paused. "I think the work deserves better than that." Aldrich's hands were still on the workbench. He looked at them. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone should know. Not the government, not the journalists. Someone who can hold it and tell it honestly." He met Aldrich's eyes. "I'm saying I could be that." The silence that followed was different from the others. Heavier, fuller, the way a mainspring feels when it's fully wound. "You've been here 11 weeks, Aldrich said. Long enough. What would you do with it? The story. I don't know yet, but it shouldn't disappear. You shouldn't disappear. Aldrich was quiet for a very long time. Then he said carefully, "In my experience, most people who want to preserve something are really trying to preserve their idea of it. The thing itself gets lost. I know." You know, Aldrich said. "You don't know if it's true yet." The honest answer, the precise answer, the watchmaker's answer. "Fair," Cale said. What happened in the weeks that followed was not a dramatic extraction. It was not a chase or a confrontation or a federal arrest. It was quieter and stranger, and in retrospect, very much in keeping with the man at the center of it. Aldrich made a phone call to a number Cale was not given, in German, for approximately 12 minutes. When he came back to the bench, he said, "There are still people who remember what the work was, who consider it worth protecting." The call had been to someone Aldrich referred to only as the archivist, a woman, former BND, retired, living in Portugal. She had apparently spent 15 years after leaving active service systematically documenting the human elements of Meridian. Not the technical operations, not the signals data, but the people, their real names, their histories, their lives before and after the program had claimed them. She was, Aldrich explained, building something she called a private archive, not for publication, not for governments, for the record, for the specific, stubborn human belief that the truth of something shouldn't end with the people who lived it. "She wants you to send her the logbooks," Cale said. "She wants more than that." Aldrich paused. "She wants me to come to Portugal." The statement hung in the air of the shop. "Would you?" "I haven't been out of West Virginia in 11 years, Aldrich said, as if that answered the question. As if it didn't. There was one more morning before everything changed. Cale arrived to find a woman sitting in the shop. She was perhaps 65, gray-haired, well-dressed, with an air of contained authority that reminded Cale of Aldrich himself. She was sitting in the customer's chair beside the counter, and she was holding a watch. Not one of the shop's watches. Her own. An old one. A woman's watch, small-cased, on a worn leather strap. She held it in both hands, the way people held things they couldn't bring themselves to put down. Aldrich was at the bench. He looked at Cale when he entered, and his expression was again that careful, recalibrating thing. "This is Dr. Miriam Holt," Aldrich said. "She works for an oversight office within the State Department." Dr. Holt looked at Cale with eyes that were measuring things rapidly and without obvious effort. "You're the apprentice," she said. "Cale Morrow." It was not a question. "Yes." "Good." She looked back at Aldrich. "I was telling Mr. Venn that the formal review has been moved forward. The timeline I believe you were given, 6 weeks, is no longer accurate. It's closer to 10 days. The temperature of the room changed. "Who called my apprentice?" Aldrich asked. His voice was steady but very quiet. "Someone within our office who has complicated feelings about how this situation has been handled," Holt said. Not apologetically. Factually. "She wasn't wrong to warn you. She was wrong to go around the process." "And what is the process?" Cale asked. Holt looked at him as if considering whether he warranted a full answer. Apparently she decided he did. "Mr. Venn's presence here was known to a small group within American counterintelligence for the past 18 years. It was allowed to continue because the legacy monitoring role had value, passive, minimal, but real. When that value was assessed as effectively zero, the question became how to close it correctly." She paused. "There are people within the review process who want to close it loudly. A demonstration of oversight effectiveness, a named foreign national, operating undisclosed dramatic resolution. And you? I think that's politically useful and operationally stupid. A 73-year-old watchmaker who spent 40 years listening to dead signals is not a threat. Turning him into one by handling this badly accomplishes nothing except embarrassing several allied governments and ruining one life that didn't deserve ruining." She looked at the watch in her hands. "My father had one of these repaired here," she said. In 2004. Brought it himself, drove up from Charleston. Said it was the best repair work he'd ever had done on a timepiece. She turned the watch over. He died in 2007. I've kept it running since then. I don't know how. I just have. Aldrich was still. What are you proposing? He asked. A formal disclosure arrangement. Mr. Venn acknowledges his history to a closed oversight panel. The panel acknowledges that the arrangement was passively tolerated by American intelligence. Both parties agree that no material harm occurred. Mr. Venn applies for legal residency under a humanitarian exception, which, given his age, his record, and the context, would likely be approved. She paused. It's not clean. It's not simple. But it keeps an old man in his shop and keeps several allied governments from having to answer uncomfortable questions in public. Silence. You're offering to bury it, Cale said. I'm offering to resolve it, Holt said precisely, without any more damage than has already been done. Aldrich was very quiet. He looked at his hands, at the tools on the bench, at the clocks on the walls. And in exchange? He asked. The logbooks. Everything in the back room. Full cooperation with the closed review. She met his eyes. And your word that the passive monitoring has ended, which I believe it effectively has. Aldrich was quiet for a long time. It has, he said, for 3 years, since the last functional relay carrier frequency went dark. Holt nodded. Then we're talking about documenting history, not stopping an active operation. Can I keep the shop? Aldrich asked. The question was simple, direct. The question of a man who had been many things and had decided that this bench, this light, these clocks, was the thing he'd kept that mattered. Holt looked at him for a moment. She turned the watch over in her hands one more time, set it on the counter between them. My father brought this watch here at 68 years old, she said. He drove 3 hours from Charleston because he'd heard there was one good watchmaker left in the region. He didn't call ahead. He just came. She looked at Aldrich. You spent 2 days on it. Replaced the crown and stem, serviced the movement, replaced the crystal. You charged him $60. He told me it was the most honest transaction he'd had in years. Aldrich was quiet. He was looking at the watch. He was a careful man, Holt continued. Spent 30 years in federal service. He knew things about certain programs that he never talked about, even to me, even after he retired. She paused. He told me once that the people who really held things together, who actually kept the machinery running, were almost never the ones you heard about. He said the system depended on the invisible ones, and he said it with enough weight that I understood he was speaking about something real. She looked at Aldrich steadily. I don't know if he knew about you specifically. I don't know what he knew. But I've been in this work long enough to understand that some accounts deserve to be settled quietly, and some men deserve to be left in peace. And I came here today because I think both of those things are true in this case. She looked at Cale. And because there should be a witness. The room held that. That's the goal, she said finally. The formal review took 8 days. Cale was not present for it. He ran the shop. He repaired watches. He answered customer questions about turnaround times and explained gently to a woman in her 80s that her husband's Elgin wasn't repairable, but that he could recommend a good display case for it so it remained visible and honored. He did the work the way Aldrich had taught him, carefully, without rushing, with the understanding that what passed through his hands was more than mechanical, that it carried weight beyond its function. Aldrich returned on the 9th day. He came through the front door at 9 in the morning, 45 minutes after opening, hung his coat on the hook, poured himself coffee, sat at the bench. He put on the loop, picked up the tweezers, reached for the watch he'd been working on before everything had accelerated. Well, Cale said, residential status pending, shop unaffected, logbooks transferred to Federal Archive. Hess has been formally notified that my liaison function is concluded. He examined the movement under the loop. That's the short version. And the long version? Aldrich made a small adjustment. Checked the balance wheel. The long version is that a great many people sat in a room and talked about my life for 8 days, and at the end of it, the consensus was that it wasn't worth the trouble of ruining. He paused. I'm choosing to take that as a compliment. Cale almost laughed. The archivist, he said. The woman in Portugal. She'll receive copies of the relevant portions of the logbooks, not the active monitoring records, the personal ones. He turned a small screw with a precision that was almost reverential. She'll add them to what she's building. What is she building exactly? Aldrich set down the tweezers, looked at the movement on the mat before him, all its tiny components, all its interlocking dependencies, the way everything had to work in concert for any of it to mean anything. A record, he said, of people who did quiet work that nobody saw, who were reliable in ways that were never acknowledged, who kept things running, systems, networks, arrangements, that protected people who didn't know they needed protecting. He looked at Cale. She calls it the silent mechanism. The name hung in the air of the shop. Cale looked at the 47 clocks on the walls. That's good, he said. Yes, Aldrich said. It is. Spring came to Harwick the way it always did, slowly, grudgingly, the cold releasing its grip in stages rather than all at once. By March, the shop had the quality of light Cale liked best. Morning sun angling through the front windows and catching the cases at a low angle, making the watch faces glow as if lit from inside. Business continued. People brought their broken time. A young man brought in his late father's Seiko. Military issue, battered, missing the crystal and 2 of the day markers. He sat in the customer's chair and explained that his father had worn it every day for 20 years and that it had stopped the morning he died, and that he wanted it running again because he couldn't stand the thought of time having stopped on his father. Cale listened. He listened the way Aldrich had taught him, not just for the technical details, but for the thing underneath the technical details. The grief, the need, the particular human impulse to keep something running as a way of keeping something else alive. He took the watch. He said, "I'll have it for you when it's right." He'd learned that phrase from Aldrich. He understood now why it was the right phrase, not a promise of schedule, a promise of care. Not, "I'll rush this through," or "give me an hour." Something older and more sincere than either of those. "I will take this seriously. I will do it correctly. I will return to you something worthy of what it means." The young man nodded, left. He didn't ask how much it would cost. That kind of question didn't fit the moment, and somehow he knew it. A woman in her 70s brought in a clock that had belonged to her grandmother's grandmother. Swiss movement, 1880s, the kind of piece that had accumulated not just age, but history. She apologized for how dirty it was, how badly it needed work. She said it embarrassed her to bring something in this condition. Cale told her that the dirt was just evidence of use, and use was how things became important. She looked at him the way people sometimes looked at Aldrich, with the slightly startled recognition of having heard the right thing. That sentiment had come from somewhere too. A teenager came in with a pocket watch he'd found in his grandfather's attic. He wanted to know if it was worth anything. Cale examined it carefully, explained what it was. An early Illinois watch company model, 1903, in good condition considering its age, and told him a fair market value. The boy seemed unimpressed. He'd been hoping for something dramatic. Cale told him that most things valuable were undramatic. That value accumulated slowly, over long periods of ordinary use, and that the best timepieces were the ones that had been trusted and kept and wound regularly by hands that took the trouble. The boy looked at the watch differently after that. He kept it. The hidden door in the back room was still there. The combination lock was gone, removed as part of the transfer to federal oversight. Behind it now, nothing. Empty space. Just a recess in the wall about the size of a small filing drawer, painted over, unoccupied. Cale had thought about what to put in it. He hadn't decided yet. He thought sometimes about leaving it empty. About the empty space as its own kind of record, the shape of what had been removed, visible in absence, a mechanism's cavity, the place where the secret had lived. But that felt like sentimentality. And sentimentality, Aldrich had taught him, was the enemy of precision. The Collins transceiver was gone. The logbooks, the signal analyzer, the portable equipment, all documented, photographed, removed. The back room now held only what it should: spare parts, supply boxes, 3 antique bracket clocks awaiting restoration. One of those clocks, a Vienna regulator circa 1870, had been in the back room as long as the shop had existed, possibly longer. Its case was damaged. Its movement was seized. Aldrich had always said he would get to it eventually. He never had. Cale started on it in February. It took him 6 weeks. The movement was more complex than he'd expected, modified by at least 2 different previous repairers, each one leaving traces of their work in the form of replaced parts that didn't quite fit. He had to research the original specification, source correct replacement components through a supplier in Pennsylvania, fabricate one part himself on the lathe in the back. He regulated it over 12 days, adjusting in fractions until the pendulum's arc described the exact period the movement required. When it was finished and running, mounted back in its case and set on the shelf in the back room, its tick was different from the others, deeper, more deliberate. The particular authority of a mechanism that had been very specifically designed for one purpose, and was now, finally, doing exactly that. Aldrich worked on one of the other bracket clocks on a Thursday afternoon, Cale on a railroad watch beside him. They were quiet in the easy way of 2 people who had said the things that needed to be said and no longer needed to fill the air. "I want to tell you something," Aldrich said, without looking up from the movement. "All right. What I said to you in November, about knowledge being a weight, about you not understanding that yet. I remember. You were right to push through it anyway." He made a delicate adjustment, checked it, made another. "Not knowing doesn't protect you. It just leaves you standing in the dark while the machinery runs without you." Cale thought about this. "Did you know?" he asked. "When you recruited me, when you hired me, did you know this would happen eventually?" Aldrich was quiet for a moment. "Denkman called me before you arrived," he said. "He told me you were careful, meticulous, that you listened more than you spoke." "You talked to Denkman?" "We've known each other for 30 years. He sends me good students occasionally." Aldrich glanced at Cale. He didn't know about the rest of it. He sent you because you were the best student he'd had in a decade, and this was the best shop he could point you toward. "But you knew I'd find it eventually." "I suspected." He returned to the movement. "I think, if I am honest, I had been looking for someone to find it for a long time. Not to expose it, not to fix it, just to know. Just so there was one other person who understood what this place had been." He set down his tools, looked at the bracket clock. "You understand what it's like to spend decades being something, and to know that when you're gone, what you were will be gone too. Not because it didn't matter, but because it was designed to be invisible." Cale understood, more than he'd expected to, sitting in this shop 11 weeks ago with a portfolio of certificates and too much nervous energy. "The archivist," he said. "She'll make sure it's not invisible." "She'll make sure the people are not invisible," Aldrich said. "The work may still have to stay quiet, for now. For now." The words carried a weight that felt like an opening rather than a closing, a mechanism still in motion, a spring still unwinding. On the last Friday in April, a woman came into the shop. She was perhaps 80, moving slowly with the particular dignity of someone who has decided that age is not an apology. She placed a watch on the counter. A man's watch. Large cased, silver, with an inscription on the back. "My brother's," she said. "He died last year. He was 91 years old." She looked at the watch with a kind of tender grief that was very quiet, very old. "He wore this every day since 1953. It hasn't run since the morning he passed." She looked at Cale. "Can you fix it?" Cale picked the watch up carefully, turned it over, read the inscription on the case back. A name, a date, 2 words. Still running. He looked at the woman. Her face had the quality of someone who had been waiting to ask this question for a year, and had finally arrived at the place where asking was possible. "I'll have it for you when it's right," he said. She nodded, as if this was exactly what she'd expected to hear. as if the formulation contained something she needed, the promise of care without the burden of a deadline. After she left, Cale sat with the watch for a moment before opening it. He thought about what "still running" meant as an inscription, a declaration, a piece of someone's private defiance against the way things wear down. Go quiet, surrender. He thought about who had inscribed it, and when, and what the act of having it inscribed had meant to them. A man who wanted to be reminded, a woman who had wanted to remind him. Time moving, still running. He opened the case back and looked at the movement. Original mostly, a few replaced parts over the decades. A crown wheel from a different era. Someone had done a repair at some point and used what was available. The main plate showed the wear patterns of a watch that had been wound and carried and worn every single day for 70 years. The brass was almost polished smooth in the places where it was touched most, worn but not dead. The mainspring was intact. The escapement was sound. What had stopped it was a piece of debris in the gear train, a fragment of something, dust or metal, lodged between two wheels, halting the mechanism mid-motion. Not broken, just stopped. He removed the obstruction with tweezers, set the balance wheel in motion with the tip of a tool. The watch began to tick. He held it for a moment, listening to it count out its small, reliable beats into the quiet of the shop. 47 clocks on the walls, all marking time. One more joining them. A mechanism restored. A thing that had stopped, moving again. Aldrich looked over from his bench, looked at the watch in Cale's hands, looked at Cale. "Well done," he said. It was the first time he'd said it. In 7 months of work, of carefully taught technique and quietly corrected mistakes and patient instruction given in the minimal way of a man who believed that showing was better than explaining. This was the first time those two words had been said directly and meant for Cale specifically. Cale set the watch carefully on the mat, picked up his loop, returned to his own work. He did not trust himself to say anything, but he felt it land, the way a gear settles into mesh. Clean, certain. The particular satisfaction of a thing fitting correctly into the space that had been waiting for it. Outside, Route 9 moved in its ordinary way. The town of Harwick continued its ordinary business. The covered bridge stood where it had stood since 1887. The coal heritage endured in photographs and memory. And on the corner of Milburn Street, beneath a hand-painted sign that read Venn and Son Horological Services, 2 men sat beneath a green-shaded lamp and repaired broken time with the patience of people who understood that what appears stopped is not always finished, just waiting for the right hands to start it again. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday in May. It came from Lisbon, Portugal. No return address, but Aldrich recognized the handwriting immediately. He held it for a moment without opening it, and Cale pretended not to watch him. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed a building, low, whitewashed, set on a hillside above what appeared to be a coastal town. On the front of the building, a modest sign. In Portuguese and English, the Silent Mechanism Archive, Private Historical Collection. The note, translated by Aldrich aloud and haltingly, as if he needed to hear the words in English to fully understand them. It's open. Small for now. 12 operators documented. Yours will be the 13th. Come when you can. The view of the water is worth the trip. Aldrich set the photograph on the workbench. Looked at it. Cale looked at it too. You should go, Cale said. The shop. I can run the shop. Aldrich looked at him sharply. Then something in his expression released, very slightly, like a mainspring unwinding by a single tooth. You've been here 5 months, he said. Long enough. The same words as before, but with different weight now. 5 months of understanding what the work was, what the shop was, what the man at the bench was and had been and had carried. Long enough to be trusted with it. Aldrich picked up the photograph, turned it over, read something on the back that he did not share. 2 weeks, he said. I'd be gone 2 weeks. The Harrington bracket clock will be ready by then if you leave me instructions. It needs a specific caliber of mainspring, The supplier in Cincinnati, I know. I have the catalog number. Aldrich was quiet. He looked around the shop the way a man looks around a place he loves, taking inventory of everything, saving it somewhere inside where it would keep. Don't change anything, he said. I won't. Not the arrangement of the tools, not the way the cases are organized. I know. And if the rotary phone rings, I'll answer it. Aldrich looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his tweezers and turned back to the movement in front of him. I'll book the ticket tonight, he said. The morning Aldrich left was a Thursday in late May, clear and cool, the light already strong by 8 o'clock. He came into the shop before his flight to say goodbye to it, which was not something he'd told Cale he was going to do, but which Cale had known would happen. He walked through slowly, touched the display cases, checked the clocks, a habit always, the small calibrations of wound springs and accurate rates. He stood in the back room for a moment, looking at the empty recess in the wall, the space where the mechanism had been. He came out, put on his coat. At the door, he stopped. Cale. Yes. The & Son, he said. On the sign. Cale waited. My handler in 1981 thought it made the business more convincing. A family operation, established, trustworthy. Aldrich paused. I kept it all these years because it seemed like an admission of something, that the life I was living had a shape I hadn't chosen and couldn't quite fill. He looked at the sign through the window. I think you should know, he said, that the shape fits better now. He left. The door closed. The bell above it, a small brass bell, installed in 1983, which rang every time someone entered or exited, chimed once and fell silent. Cale stood in the empty shop for a moment. Then he put on the leather apron, sat down at the bench, positioned the banker's lamp, adjusted the angle of the loop, laid out the tools in the order Aldrich had taught him. He looked at the empty shop, the display cases with their organized inventory, the clocks on the walls, 47 of them, ticking in their overlapping chorus, the customer's chair, worn at the armrests, the photograph Aldrich had hung above the safe 2 weeks ago, just before packing for his trip. It was a small photograph, slightly blurry, showing a young man of perhaps 20 at a workbench in what appeared to be a European workshop. He was bent over something too small to see clearly. The light in the photograph had the quality of winter sun through a narrow window. On the back, in German, in Aldrich's own hand, Munich, 1969. The year the shape began. Cale had asked him about it. Aldrich had said, I found it in a box I hadn't opened in 30 years. I thought it was time to put it somewhere it could be seen. He picked up the next watch. It was a railroad chronometer, Hamilton 940, brought in by an old man who said his grandfather had carried it on the B&O line from 1922 to 1951 and had never once been late. The old man had wept a little when he described it. He said the watch smelled like coal smoke still, if you held it close. He said the crystal had been replaced 3 times and the dial repainted once, but the movement was original. Every jewel, every wheel, every hair-thin spring, the same as it had been 100 years ago on the first day his grandfather clipped it to a chain and walked out of the jewelry store on his way to the first day of his working life. He said he wanted it running for his own son, who was about to begin his first job. Different industry, different world, same idea. Cale opened the case back, looked at the movement. 45 jewels, 21 adjusted positions. A mechanism of enormous complexity and exquisite precision, designed to remain accurate across decades of constant motion and vibration. Designed to be trusted. Designed to keep its owner on time in a world where being late could cost lives. A train on a wrong schedule, a crossing at the wrong moment. The movement was in excellent condition, needed a full service, cleaning, oiling, regulation, but structurally sound. No broken teeth, no worn pivots. The mainspring was strong, the balance wheel beat steadily when he tested it, still running. He picked up his tweezers and began. He worked slowly, not because the work required it. The service on a 940 was well within his competence by now, but because the situation seemed to call for it. The old man's grandfather on the B&O line from 1922 to 1951, 29 years, 47 states served probably, hundreds of thousands of miles. The Hamilton keeping its time in a vest pocket through all of it, invisible, precise, reliable. Doing exactly what it was designed to do without anyone paying particular attention to how. There was a parallel there that Cale didn't try to articulate. He just felt it. Let it sit with him while he worked. The sun moved across the shop floor as the morning advanced. At 10:30, a customer came in to pick up a watch that had been ready since yesterday. At 11, a man brought in 2 pocket watches from an estate, uncertain what he had. Cale examined them, identified them, gave him an honest assessment of value and condition. The man seemed satisfied. At 1 o'clock, Cale ate a sandwich at the back bench. He thought about Lisbon, about a whitewashed building on a hill above the water, about a woman named, he still didn't know her name, Aldrich had never used it, who had spent 15 years building a record of invisible people, gathering their names and histories against the certainty that the people themselves would not survive long enough to be gathered by anyone else. He thought about what it took to spend 15 years on something that might never be fully seen. Something that existed, like the work it documented, in the gaps between visible things. A record kept not for recognition, but for the simple, stubborn belief that truth had an independent value beyond what anyone was willing to pay for it. He thought about whether the archivist knew she was doing the same work as the watchmakers she was documenting, whether she understood that her archive was its own kind of mechanism, delicate, precise, dependent on individual attention and individual care, designed to keep running after the hands that built it were gone. He thought probably she did. That kind of understanding tends to come with the territory. Outside, Route 9 carried its ordinary traffic. The covered bridge stood over its creek, 1887 engineering in its permanent, modest competence. The town of Harwick continued its afternoon in the particular way of small Appalachian towns in the second quarter of any given year. Without drama, without urgency, with the kind of persistent continuity that is its own form of accomplishment. The 47 clocks on the walls of Venn Horological ticked in their overlapping rhythms, each one slightly different, each one measuring the same time in its own voice. The Vienna regulator Cale had restored in February ticked from the back room, its deeper voice just audible through the doorway. The mantel clocks in their mahogany cases kept their faster beat. The pocket watches in the display cases were silent. They didn't run unless wound, but they were present in the way that all potential is present, available, ready. And on the corner of Milburn Street, beneath a hand-painted sign that was truer than it had ever been, a young man sat in the circle of a green-shaded light and repaired the time that other people had broken, with the patience that had been given to him by a man who had learned it from the silence and from the work, and from the particular courage of remaining precisely what you are in a world that had asked you to be invisible. The watches kept counting. The truth, long wound, continued to run. It always does if someone takes the trouble to keep it going. And somewhere in Lisbon, in a whitewashed building on a hill above the Atlantic, a woman was adding one more name to a record that no one was supposed to know existed, writing it carefully, getting it right, building the kind of archive that outlasts the people who built it, that carries information forward through time the way a well-made mechanism carries its motion, reliably, precisely, without the need for anyone to be watching. A silent mechanism, still running.